Hello everyone. Tonight, we step quietly into the earthy, smoke-heavy world of medieval village life. A place where the scent of wood smoke clings to the rafters, and the ground beneath you is hard-packed dirt, swept only when someone happens to remember, and never entirely free of stray chicken feathers. You find yourself inside a single-room hut, where dim candlelight flickers across uneven beams, and the air carries the smell of evening stew mixed with something unmistakably human. In the corner sits a straw bed, uneven and shared. A tangled heap of blankets, wool, and whatever hay the goat hasn't already claimed. If you're hoping for anything resembling modern privacy or romance, you likely won't last long here. So before settling in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy this kind of content. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now lower the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move slowly across the packed earth floor, feeling its ridges and dips under bare feet. Nearby, the straw mattress has molded itself to the bodies that have used it for years. There's no memory foam here, just a scratchy reminder of the fields it came from. If fortune favors you, the bed is lifted slightly off the ground to keep dampness from creeping into your bones. If not, you may be sharing it with the family chicken until she finds somewhere warmer. This was the romantic setting for most peasant couples, with love unfolding on bedding that also hosted fleas, lice, and the occasional mouse darting through the darkness. And yet, this was ordinary. In fact, historians still debate whether peasants even viewed the bed as a private space at all, or simply another extension of daily labor. Intimacy wasn't hidden by walls or rooms, because there were none to hide it behind. The same mattress served as a place to give birth, nurse children, recover from illness, and, when possible, share closeness with a partner. Privacy here depended more on timing than on space. By the faint glow of the hearth, you might try to set a mood, but atmosphere in a medieval hut comes with smoke stinging your eyes, since the chimney is little more than a hole in the roof. The warmth is welcome, especially during winter, so the coughing and irritation are simply endured. This was romance shaped by survival. The floor isn't clean to impress, it's cleared so you don't trip over a stool on the way to the bed. You may even have to gently push the family dog or sheep aside before slipping under the wool blankets. The established historical understanding is clear. Most medieval peasants lived in single-room homes where all aspects of life took place together. Archaeological findings show that sleeping areas were often part of a multi-purpose space, with animals sometimes kept indoors for warmth. That means the background noise of intimacy might include a goat's bleat or the rattle of a cow's tether. Here's the unexpected part. Some couples found this reassuring. Familiar sounds, the closeness of people and animals, and the steady rhythm of breathing in the dark created a shared sense of life that, in their context, was as meaningful as a candlelit dinner. With enough imagination, you could say medieval intimacy was almost communal, though thankfully without actual neighbor participation. Still, people found small ways to suggest privacy. A rough linen curtain might be hung from a beam to form a modest sleeping alcove. Aromatic herbs could be scattered in the straw to repel pests and improve the smell. Picture sprigs of lavender tucked into the bedding, not for decoration, but because otherwise the odor alone might end any attempt at closeness before it began. There's no evening stroll to a theater, no dinner at a softly lit restaurant. Courtship, marriage, and family life all unfold within the same few square meters. Conversations meant for the bedroom happen beside a pot of stew and beneath crooked saint icons on the wall. It's modest, certainly, but also deeply practical. Historians continue to debate whether peasants saw intimacy as distinct from domestic life, or simply another necessity, like baking bread or mending clothes. There's something grounding in that idea. No elaborate preparations, no long checklist, just the effort to find connection wherever possible, even if that place is a scratchy straw bed accompanied by pigs shifting in their pen. The packed earth floor holds the marks of the day, muddy footprints, spilled broth, dents where someone knelt to fix a shoe. And now, in the fading firelight, it becomes the setting for something quieter and deeply human. You adjust the blankets, settle into the straw, and accept that romance here isn't about creating the perfect scene. It's about recognizing it, no matter how much dirt clings to the floor. You wake to the scent of hay and the soft movement of animals outside. The roosters decided dawn arrived on their own schedule. Stepping into the cold, you pull your coarse wool cloak tighter, and your eyes fall on the barn, the village's social center for the young and hopeful. Courtship here looks nothing like the polished serenades of nobles. Instead, it follows the rhythm of work, and work fills every moment. You've noticed how someone carries water buckets, the relaxed swing in their stride, the way they push hair from their eyes. In a peasant world, flirting happens between chores. You lift a grain sack together. You share a drink from the same ladle, lingering just a moment longer than necessary when handing it back. The barn isn't just shelter for animals, it's a quiet stage for these exchanges. The widely accepted historical view is that rural courtship grew out of shared labor, harvesting, threshing, milking. These tasks allowed young people to spend time together without violating community expectations. Many villages treated work gatherings as acceptable spaces for attraction to develop without suspicion. It seems innocent enough, but the sense of possibility was always present. And here's the curious detail. Some communities even created playful work games that allowed brief touches, all under the respectable cover of labor. Picture a hay bundling contest where pairs must tie and stack together, ending up laughing, tangled in stalks, and brushing against one another by accident. It wasn't just harmless fun, it functioned as an approved loophole in the social code. You rest your pitchfork against the wall and notice a couple near the feed trough taking far too long adjusting a rope on an ox's harness. The older women grumble about wasted time. The younger ones act as if they don't see it, though their eyes keep drifting back. The barn feels alive, its beams absorbing the rustle of straw and the quiet, conspiratorial laughter within. Historians continue to debate whether these spaces were deliberately left less supervised to encourage marriages, or whether the lack of oversight was simply practical necessity. After all, some people had to tend the fields while others managed the animals. Either way, barns became neutral ground, places where social rules softened just enough to allow opportunity. If you want a moment of seclusion, you might slip into the loft under the excuse of fetching more straw. The ladder creaks, your boots kick up dust motes that shimmer in the sunlight, and you emerge into a space that smells sweetly of dried grass. From here, you can look down across the entire barn, unseen unless someone strains to look up. It isn't truly private, but it's distant enough to feel bold. There's a quiet romance in the barn's sensory mix, warmth rising from the cattle, the dull thud of hooves, the soft trickle of water in the trough, and the rich, earthy scent that clings to your clothes afterward. To a modern sensibility, it may seem unappealing, but to a medieval peasant it represents comfort, plenty, and life itself. Sharing that space with someone you care for becomes an unspoken promise. I am part of your work, your days, your future. You shift a pile of straw and uncover an old wooden comb. Someone left behind a small personal item in this very public place. You imagine its owner fixing their hair before stepping out to meet a sweetheart. These quiet traces lie scattered through the barn like clues, hinting at private stories threaded through daily labor. And perhaps tonight, when the animals are fed and the tools put away, someone will suggest checking the harnesses one last time. You'll follow, acting as though you don't know exactly what that means, while the barn seems to hold its breath until you leave. You sit up on the edge of the bed shared with most of your household and stretch, your breath faintly visible in the cool morning air. Across the room, younger siblings remain curled together like kittens, and the hearth has burned down to embers. Outside, mist hangs low, and through it you hear the distant church bell, another sign that life here moves to rhythms far older than you. Today is market day, but before you ever reach the stalls, you'll witness a custom that is equal parts uncomfortable and oddly endearing. The one-room house isn't only for sleeping and eating. It also hosts one of the most public moments of private life, the bedding ceremony. This takes place after a marriage, when the entire community decides it's their role to properly send the couple off on their first night. Neighbors and relatives crowd in, joking, singing, and sometimes even escorting the newlyweds toward the bed with a mix of teasing and blessing. It isn't voyeurism in a crude sense. Rather, it's the village claiming a stake in the union and ensuring it begins correctly. Records from rural parishes show this wasn't reserved for nobles. In many peasant communities across Europe, the putting to bed was a semi-ritual that blurred the boundary between celebration and inspection. The goal was to reinforce social bonds, confirm legitimacy, and, frankly, provide some entertainment in lives with little of it. One 14th-century French account describes friends carrying the groom on their shoulders while others tossed grain across the bed for fertility. Another English record notes the bride's veil being pulled away at the doorway, supposedly to let blessings enter, though it clearly sparked loud laughter. Social historians still disagree on whether couples welcomed these ceremonies or quietly feared them. On one side, it offered collective gifts of food, song, and support. On the other, it stripped away privacy on a night meant to be personal. You can imagine flushed faces, strained smiles, and nervous glances toward the door as yet another aunt or cousin steps in to offer good wishes. The sensory details linger. The smell of candle wax dripping onto the floor. Fiddle music drifting faintly from outside. The pressure of bodies packed into a small room thick with smoke and laughter. A neighbor presses a mug of ale into your hand, and you're unsure whether it's meant for warmth or courage. The straw mattress creaks as you sit, and someone calls out, "Make sure it doesn't squeak too much," sending the room into laughter. There's a strange intimacy here, not just between the couple, but between them and the entire village. It's a reminder that in the medieval world, marriage wasn't only about affection. It tied together property, alliances, and shared survival. The private was always partly public. When the door finally closes and the last guest wanders away, their singing still echoes outside. The hearth glows softly, the blankets retain warmth, and you're left in that distinctly medieval mix of romance and ritual, where the first night arrives already layered with blessing and burden. The air outside is sharp with the smell of wet earth as you follow the winding path toward the churchyard. The wooden doors remain shut, but you aren't here for Sunday Mass. You've come for something older and more unusual, a custom practiced right at the threshold. In parts of medieval Europe, promises of love and loyalty weren't always sealed before the altar. Sometimes they were spoken outside, on the church's doorstep, as if the building itself were listening. Village traditions show this wasn't merely a curiosity. For many peasants, marrying inside the church involved fees, official witnesses, and the priest's record book. Speaking vows at the doorway allowed couples to make commitments in public view without the full cost or formality of a sanctioned ceremony. This practice was often known as troth plighting. Others viewed it simply as an early step toward eventual recognition by the church. You can imagine the scene clearly. The wooden boards beneath your feet are smoothed by generations of villagers coming and going. The air carries a faint trace of candle smoke seeping through the cracks, and in the cold your breath mingles with that of the person you are about to commit to. Behind you, a few neighbors pretend to be heading for water, lingering just long enough to hear what is said. One record from a 15th-century English parish notes a couple exchanging vows this way, hands joined over the church's threshold stone. The entry states that the promise was considered binding as long as witnesses could confirm it. In other instances, a local priest stood just inside the doorway, leaning out to offer a blessing without fully stepping outside, half in, half out, as if preserving the dignity of the building. Scholars remain divided on whether these doorway vows functioned as a legal workaround or were simply a matter of custom. For poorer villagers, they may have been the only option they could afford. For others, the symbolism may have mattered more, the doorway marking the passage from one phase of life to another. There's a quiet poetry in it. The heavy wooden doors frame you both. Carved saints look down with calm expressions. Your hands, rough from labor, remain steady as you speak words that feel ancient yet entirely personal. A gust of wind rattles the latch, almost as though the church itself is offering approval or caution. Afterward, there is no grand celebration, no long tables or hired musicians. You might share a piece of bread on the walk back to your cottage or pause to greet friends who ask if it's official now. To you it is. The church steps fade behind you, but the moment lingers, clinging like the faint smell of incense in your clothes. It's a reminder that in the medieval countryside, love sometimes needed nothing more than a threshold to stand upon. Here, the year turns in a slow, steady circle. The sky shifts color, the fields change their scent, and each season brings a different rhythm to village life. Love, like everything else, bends to these patterns. Desire may feel constant, but in the medieval countryside it often rose or fell with the calendar. The cycles of planting and harvest shaped when and how couples found time for closeness. In spring, the air feels restless. The thaw releases the smell of wet earth, and planting season demands every able body. Hands stay busy, backs bent. Yet the days grow longer and warmer, allowing for twilight walks or brief moments behind a hedge. For some, spring marked the gentle start of courtship, when the future seemed as open as the newly turned fields. By late summer, the tone shifts. Harvest approaches like a ruler who demands full attention. Historical records show that during this period, even married couples spent little private time together. Everyone rose before dawn and worked until the moon climbed over the fields, meals eaten quickly under open skies. Fatigue wasn't only physical. It crept into small gestures of affection. You might manage nothing more than a nod across the field, hands too blistered for tenderness. Still, shared labor created its own closeness, a quiet bond strengthened with each sheaf tied and each basket carried. Winter, however, told a different story. Days shortened, fields lay still, and the hearth became the center of daily life. Couples spent more time indoors, pressed together against the cold, their breath mingling in the dim light. With no urgent farm work, there was time for conversation, laughter, and warmth that went beyond the fire. In some villages, winter was even seen as the season of conception, timing births for after the next harvest, when food would be more plentiful. Not all historians agree on how intentional this pattern was. Some argue that birth records reflect coincidence rather than planning, shaped by the unpredictability of medieval life. Disease, famine, and occasional war disrupted even careful intentions. Others suggest that couples and communities were more deliberate, quietly aligning intimacy with survival needs, even without formal records. A 14th-century farming diary from Flanders notes, "In summer the bed is for rest, in winter, for love." The entry is followed immediately by a note on sheep shearing, hinting that work and affection were not seen as separate parts of life, but elements of the same cycle. Imagine the comfort of that rhythm, how it settled into the body. The urgency of planting, the long stillness of winter evenings, the gentle pause of autumn when the year seemed to exhale before beginning again. The sensory contrast between seasons was sharp. Summer's closeness smelled of sweat and freshly cut grass, the air alive with insects. Winter's was wrapped in wood smoke and wool, broken only by the creak of cottage beams. In spring, you might laugh with your partner while repairing tools in the yard, sunlight spilling across the garden. In autumn, those bright hours gave way to the slower pleasure of sharing a jug of ale by the fire, knowing the fields were finished for the year. Market gossip followed these patterns as well. In spring, whispers focused on who had been walking together after Vespers. By autumn, talk shifted to who might be expecting a child come spring, an informal calendar kept in every observant mind. Marriage plans often followed the seasons too. A late winter wedding gave a couple time to settle in before heavy fieldwork began. An early autumn ceremony came with the reassurance of full grain stores to support a new household. There's a quiet romance in that inevitability. You couldn't resist the seasons, so you learned to live within them. Modern life allows light at any hour, work on your own schedule, and privacy in abundance. In the medieval village, love was always in dialogue with the land itself. Rain, frost, and ripening grain all influenced when you reached for another's hand. And so, on a late winter night, with wind pressing against the shutters and firelight washing the walls in amber, there is nowhere else to be. No field calls you before dawn. The year will gather speed soon enough, but for now, you let winter's slow pulse set the pace. In this season, desire doesn't rush. It settles, curling by the hearth, content to remain. The barn carries a different scent after dusk. The air cools, dust settles into the shadows, and the last traces of golden light slip away between the timber gaps. You know the day's labor has ended because the animals have grown quiet, broken only by an occasional shuffle of hooves or a slow, contented sigh from the cow stalls. And yet, For some, the true reason for climbing the ladder into the loft is only just beginning. Across medieval villages, lofts served more than their obvious purpose of storing winter feed. They were high, tucked away, and softened by the smell and texture of hay, places where you could remain unseen without straying far from the heart of daily life. Written accounts from rural communities mention stolen conversations and whispered courtships unfolding in the dim half-light above the barn floor. The loft was a liminal space, private enough to feel bold, public enough to avoid suspicion if someone happened to pass through. The hay up here is dry and sweet, prickling against your skin but soft enough to sink into. Through gaps in the roof slats, you glimpse the moon, its pale light breaking into uneven lines across the boards. From this vantage point, you watch the yard below, someone closing the henhouse, a dog nosing an empty bucket, while your companion leans closer, voice kept low so it won't carry. Some researchers note that lofts offered more than romantic seclusion. They were also places to trade secrets, make plans, or share gossip. In villages where nearly every word could spread by morning, the loft gave a rare sense of control over your own story. Whether murmuring about love or a neighbor's misstep, the hay absorbed sound as surely as it softened the scurry of mice between the bales. Not every loft tale ended in affection. Folklore from certain regions paints them as scenes of mischief or youthful defiance, where bold boys bragged of sneaking up, only to have the ladder pulled away by laughing girls. In some stories, a stern elder climbed up without warning, scattering the quiet like startled birds. These tales functioned as both caution and amusement, retold with knowing smiles around the hearth. One 15th-century German village chronicle recounts a loft meeting that ended in a public reckoning in the square. The couple was found reclining on a heap of clover hay, boots off, faces flushed, not scandalous by modern standards, but suggestive enough for watchful neighbors. Their punishment was to clean the entire barnyard together, a sentence that likely delighted the gossips more than it embarrassed the pair. There's something about the loft's sensory world that lingers. Straw tickles your hair. Hay holds the day's warmth. A soft rustle follows every shift of your body. Below, the animals breathe steadily, like a shared heartbeat, while wooden beams creak as they adjust to the cooling night. The loft becomes a cocoon, wrapping you in golden walls and pushing the outside world farther away. In that quiet, you're aware of how small the village is, how little room there is to be truly alone. Yet here, suspended between floor and roof, it feels as though you've carved out a space of your own, a place where laughter is safe, words don't echo, and time seems to slow. When you finally climb down, the ladder swaying gently beneath you, the night air feels sharper. The yard is nearly empty, lanterns guttering out. You brush bits of hay from your clothes, careful to leave no trace that might catch an elder's eye, and head home with the faint scent of clover trailing behind like a secret you intend to keep. Morning arrives with a sound that cuts through the mist, the deep, deliberate toll of the church bell. It's not calling for Sunday Mass. It's summoning villagers to another kind of gathering, the making of vows before those who will remember them. The practice is older than many of the cottages you pass, unfolding in a way that is solemn yet oddly informal. The church doorway stands open, but the couple does not enter. Instead, they meet just outside the threshold, where the carved lintel casts a shadow across worn flagstones. The place feels charged, as if the air itself is holding still. In a time when formal marriages often required costly paperwork or the presence of high-ranking clergy, some couples chose to seal their promises here, within sight of the altar but not quite upon it. Parish records from parts of England and northern France suggest these doorstep unions carried real weight. A couple could clasp hands over the threshold stone, speak their vows clearly before witnesses, and walk away considered bound in the eyes of the community. The logic was straightforward. Everyone saw it, everyone heard it, and therefore everyone could confirm it. In a world where memory served as legal proof, that was enough. The sensory details remain vivid even centuries later. The air smells of old oak and damp stone. Morning light filters through stained glass, spilling faint color onto the ground. A neighbor lingers nearby with a basket of onions, pretending to pass by, though her eyes stay fixed on the joined hands. Somewhere a child laughs before being quieted. The priest may stand just inside the doorway, robes brushing the frame as he leans forward to offer a blessing without stepping into the sun. Scholars continue to debate the meaning of this half-in, half-out ritual. Some see it as a clever way to avoid church fees or legal complications. Others view it as deeply symbolic, the doorway marking the meeting of sacred and everyday life, a true threshold into a shared future. Perhaps, as with many rural customs, it was both practical and poetic at once. One remembered story tells of a bride without a veil, carrying a sprig of rosemary, and a groom who brought a loaf of fresh bread. After their vows, they broke the loaf together, each taking a piece before offering some to the small crowd. The gesture was simple and unadorned, yet it bound them to one another and to the village's shared table. When the words are spoken, the witnesses nod in approval. The couple steps out of the doorway's shadow into the open square, where the day's ordinary bustle resumes, haggling over turnips, the rattle of a cartwheel on cobblestones, the smell of bread baking nearby. Life goes on, but they walk home with a different weight in their stride, the threshold behind them and a shared path ahead. Steam curls from the bathhouse roof like a slow-moving dragon, and you follow it, drawn forward as naturally as a cat toward sunlight. The door creaks open, releasing a warm, damp breath into the cold lane, and the scent reaches you first. Resin-rich wood, wet stone, a trace of rosemary from someone's sachet, and the clean, mineral edge of heated water. You step inside and the world seems to soften. Voices lower. Laughter rounds at the edges. The knock of wooden clogs on the floor sounds like rain tapping a pier. Compared to the smoky cottage or the dusty loft, this feels like another world. Slick, bright, and gently lulling. You set your bundle on a bench and take in the scene. Attendants move with practiced ease, refilling buckets, feeding the furnace, handing out small wooden ladles for pouring hot water over tired shoulders. The tubs aren't private so much as personal. You ease into one and feel your bones remember how cold they've been for months. The surface ripples with each breath. Someone nearby hums a fragment of a song you recall from last midsummer, and it strikes you that the bathhouse is as much a storehouse of memories as it is a place to wash. Records from cities and market towns show that public baths were common across late medieval Europe, especially in German regions, France, and parts of Italy. Guild rules governed opening hours, firewood supplies, even the quality of towels, as if cleanliness itself required formal oversight. One set of regulations from Augsburg insists bathkeepers provide a bucket of cool water for anyone who feels faint and keep benches scrubbed, a reminder that comfort and order mattered even when people were meant to relax. If you imagine chaos, think again. The bathhouse runs like a mill, only warmer and scented. Rules, however, never silence rumor. The bathhouse is the town's warmest exchange of gossip. You hear who argued with the reeve over fence lines, who dropped a jug at the well, who lingered a second too long over the baker's apprentice. Reputation drifts here like steam, condensing on beams and dripping into conversation. You pretend not to listen. Everyone does. An attendant arrives with mugs of watered wine, because apparently even your hands deserve company. A small detail worth keeping. In some places, snacks and drinks were served right in the tubs, a kind of medieval spa tavern. Picture yourself nibbling honey cake while soaking, hoping no crumbs escape into the water like tiny ships of embarrassment. In a few illustrations, bathers wear conical felt hats to keep their heads cool, giving off more relaxed wizard than medical patient. It's practical and faintly theatrical. You trail your hand through the water and feel warmth returning to your fingers. Across the room, a couple trades a quiet joke, their laughter dissolving into steam. That's the understated truth of this place. The bathhouse acts as a social cushion, a pause where conversation loosens and glances soften. Affection is public but gentled. People sit shoulder to shoulder, passing ladles, offering towels, praising rosemary sachets with a tone that could be flirtation or simple gratitude. Scholars still debate how often these spaces were mixed. Some periods and regions likely allowed shared bathing at certain hours, while others enforced strict separation or alternation. Church councils and moral writers issued repeated warnings about impropriety in baths, which reveals less about constant behavior and more about persistent anxiety. The reality seems local. What was frowned upon in one town might be ordinary in the next, rules thickening and thinning like the steam itself. You also learn an unspoken bathhouse rule: no one rushes. Heat slows the body, thickens thought, and even the sharpest neighbor becomes mellow in the warm current. That doesn't mean the place is without boundaries. Bath keepers usher out rowdy youths and keep watch over corners where shadows gather too eagerly. Municipal fines exist for disorderly conduct among bathers, a dry phrase that needs no translation. Let's say the staff know exactly how to tap a bucket on the floor to reset the mood. You lean back against the tub's rim and watch moisture darken the ceiling beams. Behind the furnace wall, a log shifts with a hollow thud. There's a gentle vanity to bathing as well: wooden combs, cloth-wrapped herbs, the way people emerge glowing, as if the world has been polished smoother. After a day of threshing, you leave feeling ready to be painted into a manuscript margin, cheeks touched with gold. Not everyone approves. A friar in the square is known to warn about the dangers of warm water and warmer company. After waves of plague, some towns restricted bathing, or at least its social side. The reasoning shifts: sometimes cleanliness is praised, sometimes feared. Still, the bathhouse endures like a stubborn spring. When limits are imposed, villagers adapt, moving to private tubs in back rooms or washing by the river when weather allows. Steam, it seems, belongs to the people, and people are resourceful. You strike up a conversation with the woman in the next tub. She tells you her cousin met her husband here, after he offered her the better ladle and a seat closer to the furnace, which may be the most practical romance you've heard all year. You both snort softly, sending a small wave over the rim. First light joke noted: nothing says care like an upgraded ladle. The second comes when an attendant scolds a boy for leaping into a tub, apparently not an approved medieval swimming technique. The third is your private resolve to invent luxury bath hats and become, as minstrels might say, absurdly prosperous. Beneath the humor lies a quieter truth. The bathhouse grants peasant life something rare: permitted pause. The door closes on chores. Heat unwinds the day. For an hour, you're allowed to be a body at rest rather than hands that pull, lift, mend, and haul. That shift in posture invites a shift in feeling. Conversations lean toward confidences. Eyes soften. A shoulder resting lightly against another becomes both a thank you and a possibility. Later moralists tried to portray bathhouses as dens of vice, and in some places sex work did attach itself to the trade. But the fuller picture is broader and warmer. Many bathhouses were family-run, their account books filled with deliveries and laundry notes, their rooms shared by elders, children, and laborers seeking heat and calm. If temptation rises with the steam, so does kindness. What you carry out with your towel is a complicated, human truth. And when you finally climb from the water, your skin feels new. Your hair carries a light herbal scent, and the evening air outside feels smooth, almost silky. You step into the lane with unhurried feet, the world slightly blurred at the edges in a pleasant way. The bathhouse door shuts behind you with a gentle thud, like a book closing after a satisfying chapter. Tomorrow, chores will return with their sharp demands, but tonight your body remembers ease, and your heart follows. You store that feeling like a warm stone in your pocket, small enough to keep, weighty enough to matter. By day, the village green looks plain enough: grass worn thin by passing boots, a few benches faded to silvery gray, chickens scratching in the dirt. Tonight, it feels altered. Torches flicker around a tall wooden pole wrapped in fresh greenery and bright ribbons. Drums beat at an easy, steady pace, and the air is thick with the smells of wood smoke, crushed grass, and something sweet baking nearby. The maple dance is about to start, bringing with it a night balance between custom and temptation. May festivals in medieval Europe blended the sacred with the unruly. Chroniclers note that these gatherings often aligned with religious feast days, yet the mood leaned more toward revelry than devotion. The pole itself, stripped of bark and dressed in ribbons, drew music, laughter, and rituals heavy with fertility symbolism. Some towns set it close to the church, almost daring holiness to look away. Others placed it in a meadow or open green beyond the walls, giving the celebration a looser feel. A 15th century account from the Low Countries describes the maple dance as a weaving of people as much as ribbons, pairs stepping in and out, circling and crossing until the pole was wrapped in color. Dancers were not chosen at random. Looks exchanged earlier often decided who paired with whom. A hand resting just a moment longer on a ribbon could be enough to plan a meeting later that night. The soundscape layers itself naturally, drums low and constant, flutes cutting lightly between beats, an occasional call from someone offering mugs of spiced ale. Ribbons snap softly in the breeze, and when dancers pass close, you catch the scent of flowers crushed into their hair. From the edge of the circle, you can watch alliances form and fade within a single song. Scholars still debate whether these dances were meant mainly for matchmaking or for strengthening communal bonds. Some suggest they offered approved chances for flirtation under the village's watchful eye. Others argue the focus was shared joy, with romance emerging incidentally. Either way, the energy was clear, making the air feel lighter and the night stretch wider. Local customs varied. In some English villages, the maypole doubled as a climbing challenge, with young men scrambling for small prizes tied at the top. In certain alpine regions, a bachelor planted a decorated pole outside a woman's home to declare interest. Both acts mixed confidence with public display, and the gossip they sparked carried into the next market day. From where you stand, the dance is mesmerizing. Feet strike the ground in rhythm as ribbons wind tighter around the pole. When the music shifts, the dancers reverse direction, unwinding what they've made, a quiet reminder that bonds can loosen as easily as they form. You feel yourself moving with the beat, even without touching a ribbon. As night deepens, lanterns sway from posts, spilling warm pools of light across the grass. The music fades into scattered talk and laughter drifting over the green. In the shadows, a few pairs slip away into the lanes branching out from the village center. No one comments. It's part of the pattern, as natural as the weaving and unweaving of ribbons. When the final drumbeat dies, the maple stands alone, wrapped in its tangle of color. Tomorrow it will be just a pole again, ribbons fluttering in daylight. Tonight, it served as a focus for movement and glances, a reminder that even in tightly knit communities, a few threads always remain loose, waiting for the music to return. The bed smells faintly of smoke and wool, but tonight it also carries something less tangible, look, or so you've heard. Earlier, you noticed your partner slip away from the hearth and return with a strangely lumpy pillow. Now, as you pull back the blanket, you find it. A small bundle tucked beneath the sheets, light enough to hide in a fist, heavy with meaning. In the medieval countryside, superstition clung to intimacy like ivy. One of its more curious expressions was placing charms in the bed to guard or encourage fertility. Archaeological digs in rural homes have uncovered tiny pouches, knotted cords, and carved tokens hidden near sleeping places. These were not decorations. They were practical tools of belief, meant to ward off illness, misfortune, or an evil eye that might harm a couple's chances of conceiving. Some charms were marked with symbols, others were filled with herbs like rosemary, rue, or pennyroyal, plants believed to influence the body in protective or persuasive ways. Notes from 14th century herbalists show these practices sitting between medicine and magic. A sprig of vervain tied with red thread might be recommended to quicken the seed, while certain stones were kept to turn away barren winds. The language is poetic and unclear, likely by design. Mystery itself carried power. One English tale tells of a bride who placed a coin minted in her birth year beneath the mattress, hoping her fortune would grow in her new home. Another, from the Bohemian hills, describes couples laying braided hair under their pillow, binding their lives together with the literal thread. Such tokens were often left for months or years, renewed only after a birth, a death, or a sudden change in fortune. Historians disagree on how deeply people believed in these objects versus the comfort they offered. Some view charms as psychological reassurances in a world with little control over health or fate. Others see them as genuinely spiritual, part of a worldview shaped by unseen forces. Either way, placing something beneath the sheets before sharing a night carried clear intimacy, a silent message between two people. I want this to be safe, to be good, to endure. The sensory side mattered too. Imagine settling into bed and catching the faint, peppery scent of crushed rue or the soft, grassy sweetness of chamomile. The small knot of thread might rest against your hand, a quiet reminder of its presence even in the dark. And if the bed creaks at the wrong moment, you might exchange a look and murmur a joke about the charm already doing its job. Not every token, however, was meant kindly. In warning tales, jealous rivals were said to hide charms to damage a relationship. A cord knotted 9 times and buried deep in the straw could be blamed for sudden arguments or a streak of poor harvests. When such objects were discovered, they were often burned in the hearth, prayers whispered under breath as protection against whatever unseen harm they carried. This belief even entered local law. A 15th-century manor court record from northern England fines a woman for placing ill-luck herbs in another bride's bed, suggesting that such acts were feared and taken seriously enough to punish. Folklore may stretch the truth, but legal records tend to be practical. Tonight, though, the charm in your own bed is harmless. It lies quietly beneath the linen, holding its herbs and a small bone bead. Whether it works in any provable way hardly matters. What matters is that it was placed there with care and intent, in a world where care itself is rare and valuable. As you settle into the warmth, the little bundle feels less like superstition and more like a promise, one you can sense with your fingertips as sleep approaches. The cottage is still except for the soft crackle of the hearth. Outside, the night deepens, and you know that before long the household will fall into the familiar rhythm of sleeping in shifts. To modern ears, divided sleep sounds strange. Why interrupt rest at all? But in the medieval countryside, it was normal, as woven into life as the bell for vespers. The pattern was simple. After the evening meal, everyone went to bed for a few hours, the first sleep. Then, sometime after midnight, people woke, not only from habit, but because the fire needed tending, animals required checking, or certain quiet tasks were best done while the village slept. This in-between time, known as the watch or the dead of night, might last an hour or more. After it passed, people returned to bed for their second sleep, which carried them to dawn. Early modern court testimonies and household records from the 13th to 15th centuries show that this segmented sleep was common and unremarkable. The phrase, first sleep, appears casually in letters and depositions, as if no explanation were needed. Medical texts even advised what to eat between sleeps to avoid discomfort: light bread and warm ale, if available. That midnight interval was also when some of village life's most private moments took place. With children and elders still asleep, couples found a rare pocket of quiet. You could talk without the constant pull of chores, share a cup of broth, or step outside beneath the stars for a short walk along a frost-silvered lane. It was a time for soft stories, mild teasing, and plans that might not survive the rush of morning. Folklore gave the watch a faint edge of magic. In some regions, people believed this was when dreams could leak into waking life, when prayers carried extra force, and when spoken intentions traveled farther. For couples, that belief added a subtle weight, as if anything said in the dark might bind more tightly. Some scholars suggest practical reasons too. In crowded homes, waking at midnight allowed sleepers to shift places, tend infants, or rotate who stayed closest to the fire. Others point to farm life. During lambing season, for example, those hours were ideal for checking pens without disrupting the rest of the night. You can imagine it clearly: the hearth's low glow, steady but dim, the smell of wood smoke mixed with wool blankets. Outside, the air is so still you can hear the creak beneath its thin skin of ice. Your partner stirs, stretches, and meets your eyes in the half-light. No words are needed. The rhythm of the watch has lived in your body since childhood. You share a sip of ale, perhaps a quiet laugh about the neighbor's runaway goose, and then silence settles again. Eventually, you drift into the second sleep, the one that carries you toward the rooster's call. It's deeper, calmer than the first, as if the body has already shed its tension during that waking pause. When morning comes, you rise knowing you've shared not just a bed, but a rhythm, a quiet middle chapter known only to those who live by the land and the slow curve of night. By the time winter loosens its hold and evenings stretch beyond supper, the village is ready for something unruly. That's when carnival arrives. a burst of color and noise before the restraint of Lent sets in. For peasants, it's more than celebration. It's the one season when rules wobble like a loose cartwheel, and the air itself seems charged with mischief. Streets fill with masks, some carved from wood and painted in bold strokes, others stitched from scraps into grinning or leering faces. Behind each mask is a neighbor you might recognize by their gait or laugh, though today you agree not to. Musicians roam in loose groups, drummers beating skins tight enough to wake the next village, pipers threading quick tunes through the crowd. The smells of roasted chestnuts, spilled ale, and sharp torch smoke drift above dancers' heads. Accounts from 14th and 15th century towns describe Carnival as a world turned upside down. Social ranks blurred. Servants dressed as lords, women as men, and the poorest might play judge in mock trials staged in the square. In rural areas, the festival spilled into fields and barns, where plays and games edged toward the body. It was an annual release for communities under constant discipline, an approved rebellion against their own order. One Flemish chronicle tells of marriage markets held during Carnival, where couples, real or playful, were matched by a self-declared mayor of fools for the night. Some pairings dissolved when the masks came off. Others turned into real betrothals weeks later. It offered courtship a chance to grow under cover of disorder, allowing shy glances to become open laughter without fear of censure. The overload of sound and color was intentional. Imagine standing in the square at dusk, torches flaring against a darkening blue sky. They warned that the devil walks most easily behind a mask. Still, the festivals endured, shifting locations or adjusting dates whenever authorities tried to rein them in. People needed Carnival the way they needed bread. Both fed a hunger that went beyond the physical. In some alpine villages, a curious variation appeared, a procession of the bed. Young men carried a large wooden frame draped in blankets through the streets, inviting spectators to climb in for a joke or a mock blessing. It was part comedy, part coded invitation, and fully committed to bending propriety until it nearly snapped. Some historians view Carnival as a controlled release, a brief chaos that strengthened order once it ended. Others see it as a real crack in the social structure, proof that boundaries could move even if only for a few days. Either way, it created moments that would never surface in the strict daylight world. A masked dancer pulling you into the ring. A whispered joke sharper because you cannot see the speaker's eyes. The warm press of strangers packed too closely together. By morning, the streets will be littered with wilted flowers, snapped ribbons, and the remains of spilled drink. Masks will be hung on nails in the rafters until the next year. But tonight, the village moves as one restless, laughing, slightly unsteady body, shaking the dust from its bones before returning to the long, straight days of labor. And if some bonds formed under the mask survive beyond the festival, perhaps that is simply another kind of blessing, wrapped in music and smoke. You hear the noise before you see it. Boots thudding on packed earth. Laughter pushed a little too loud. A sharp cry that could be mock fear or something closer to real. You step into the lane and there they are. A cluster of young men rushing past with ribbons tied to their sleeves. A girl lifted high for a heartbeat, then set down again. As the crowd surges like water around a stone, someone shouts, "Pay the ransom." Another waves a garland, and the village hums with that uneasy mix of celebration and warning. Tonight's game is one of the oldest stories, with the roughest edges. Marriage by capture. The playful version that sometimes forgets it is meant to stay playful. You follow them toward the green. The air smells of crushed thyme and lantern smoke, and the moon hangs like a coin just out of reach. The girl's friends circle her like geese, hissing, laughing, defending, while the would-be captors bow extravagantly and plead for the honor of borrowing the bride. If you're thinking this feels theatrical, you're right. In many European villages, wedding seasons included mock abductions, stage chases, and ransom games. Shoes were stolen, veils misplaced, and brides vanished for a carefully timed 10 minutes until someone produced a jug of ale or promised a grander feast. Village memory holds this as custom, the way a body holds a scar, visible, complicated, still tender if pressed. Legal records from the 13th to 15th centuries show the darker mirror of this ritual. Courts across England, France, and parts of the Empire prosecuted raptus cases, abductions that slid into forced marriage or worse. After the 12th century, church law placed consent at the center of a valid union, and ecclesiastical courts could dissolve marriages where that consent was missing. In the ink of those ledgers, you can hear the other sound beneath tonight's drums, the one no one wants to let drown out the music. The record is clear. Sometimes the game stopped being a game. But here, now, the village insists on the festive script. A boy wearing a wreath blows a cracked horn. A cousin announces the rules. The groom must find the missing bride by riddles shouted from different doorways. You grin despite yourself. The first riddle is so bad it deserves a fine from the manor court. Light joke number 1. You mutter that whoever wrote it owes everyone fresh ale as compensation for the damage done to language. The groom runs, his breath puffing into small ghosts, while the crowd scatters clues under stools, inside hats, and once, with great ceremony, beneath a sleepy cat. Singing breaks out, more rhythmic than melodic, and 2 grandmothers start clapping time with wooden spoons. Someone tosses the groom's cap back and forth, each catch paired with a demand. A new kettle for the midwife, 2 wheels of cheese for the church roof, an extra barrel for the harvest feast. If ransom is a joke, it is also bookkeeping. Weddings are community projects, and this noisy ledger makes sure everyone sees what is being invested in the mash. Ethnographers later recorded versions of this custom far beyond a single valley. In some places, the bride's shoe was taken hostage, displayed on a cushion until beer freed it. Elsewhere, the bride herself was spirited off to a neighbor's house and pelted with sweet buns while the groom bargained publicly for her return. Half spectacle, half proof that he could provide. You can hear the lesson humming beneath the laughter. A marriage feeds more mouths than 2. The hard question is intent. Some scholars see these rituals as symbolic rehearsals of an older, harsher reality, softened echoes of true abductions from earlier centuries. Others read them as staged tests of generosity and resolve, measuring a groom by his wit and resources rather than strength. The field has never settled on one answer, and likely never will. Local custom remains stubbornly local. What stays constant is the village's need to witness the passage from single to wed and to mark that crossing with noise. You catch up with the groom near the alehouse, where riddles are being shouted from a window packed with laughing faces. He is red-cheeked, determined, and far less clever than he believes. Light joke number 2. He declares he will follow his heart, then immediately runs the wrong way, which may be the most accurate metaphor for newlyweds anyone has offered. A chorus of ants corrects him without mercy. He bows, recovers, and finally finds the bride, revealed behind a curtain of drying linen, steam rising from nearby tubs like applause. For a moment, the world narrows. The crowd quiets. She steps forward, not so much rescued as choosing to be found, and places her hand on his wrist where the pulse beats. Beneath the horseplay, you feel the ceremony in the way they hold each other's gaze. Consent, imperfectly staged but firmly claimed. The cousins cheer. The wreath-wearing boy blasts the horn again, which remains an offense to sound itself. Light joke number 3. You vow silently to steal the instrument in the name of public peace, then realize that would count as yet another abduction, and decide you have committed enough crimes for one night. They sail over, landing in a splash of damp earth and trailing ribbons. Mud streaks their boots, pride clear on their faces. If the village wanted an image of partnership, it has one. Somewhere between the laughter and the returned shoe, someone presses a sprig of rue into the bride's palm. A quiet apotropaic gesture against envy and ill will. Small, sharp-scented protection, and a reminder that even amid the jokes, care still matters. A jug appears. Its rim circles from hand to hand. The ransom turns into a toast. The night feels a shade warmer around the ring. Walking home, your thoughts don't quite settle. The performance has done its work, but it has also shown its seams. Custom can blur humor and harm until neither is easy to separate after dark. Medieval villagers understood that too. That's why rules sit beneath the noise, why elders watch the edges, why the priest is conspicuously visible along the lane, and why the alehouse shutters remain open a hand's width. The ritual insists a boundary exists, and that the village holds it together. When the couple finally vanishes into the tangle of cottages, the green exhales. Ribbons catch in hedges. Laughter thins into the smoke of banked hearths, and the moon climbs the last inch to the church roof. What's left on the ground looks like the end of any gathering. Scuffed footprints, a bent garland, the groom's cap recovered from its travels. What lingers in the mind is harder and more valuable. The understanding that union is public, that joy is tempered by care, and that the oldest stories need chaperones as much as singers. The alehouse door stands open, spilling lamplight into the lane and pulling you forward on the smell of malt and smoke. Inside, the room is a patchwork of rough-hewn tables, long benches polished by years of elbows, and low beams that force taller patrons to duck. A pot of something hearty simmers at the hearth, barley broth, perhaps, and above it hangs a rack of mugs waiting their turn. The air is thick with talk and laughter, but beneath it hums the rhythm of tankards meeting wood, the steady heartbeat of village evenings. For all its noise, the alehouse is not disorderly. It has its own pattern. Neighbors gather by trade, age, or temperament. Farmers stay near the door, craftsmen closer to the fire, and at least one table is claimed by women trading news under the pretense of buying beer to carry home. The alewife, sharp-eyed and quick with her ladle, runs the room with practiced authority, making sure no cup sits empty long enough to encourage departure. Guild records and memorial accounts confirm that alehouses were central to medieval rural life, not only for drink but for meeting, bargaining, and spreading the day's unofficial news. In hamlets without taverns or inns, the alehouse filled the role of both café and community hall. Debts were settled here, illnesses discussed, and courtships quietly noted. The boundary between public and private softened. Talk could slide from grain prices to personal matters in the time it took to swallow. A hint of flirtation was part of the atmosphere, as familiar as the scent of hops. A sideways smile while passing a mug. Fingers brushing when making change. A joke delivered with a gaze held a moment too long. These were the small currents beneath the roar. Couples might arrive as simple neighbors and leave having planned to take the longer road home. In a culture with few approved spaces for courtship, the alehouse offered warm, noisy cover for such starts. A 15th-century court record from Kent tells of a marriage dispute that began when a young man was accused of being overly familiar with a brewer's daughter during a crowded market night. His defense was that he had only asked about the quality of her hops. The elders fined him anyway, perhaps less for the offense than for assuming anyone would accept the explanation. Not all alehouse courtship stayed gentle. Drink could loosen tongues beyond charm, and the alewife would step in, often by setting a bucket of cold water on the table with a pointed look. Some local bylaws even granted alewives the authority to eject anyone who disturbed the peace with unwanted advances. A polite phrase for bothering those who were not interested. Still, much of the intrigue remained unspoken. You sip your mug and watch the patterns. Who leans closer? Who pulls back? Whose laughter lifts half a note when a certain person approaches? The smell of yeast and wood smoke clings to everyone, leveling whatever scents arrived from the lane. Somewhere, a half-tuned lute wrestles with a melody that keeps losing itself in the din. Ethnographers of early modern rural life note that alehouses often served as neutral ground, one of the few places where outsiders could mix without remark. That open space for romances crossing parish lines, thrilling or troublesome depending on old rivalries. Here in the amber light, distinctions blur. Everyone's hands are rough. Everyone's boots are muddy. Everyone's eyes catch the firelight the same way. The room's quirks add texture. A carved heart on a beam above the hearth, initials long faded. A patch of bench worn smooth where boots have rested for decades. A cluster of dried herbs over the door, not decoration, but protection, a nod to the alewife's own beliefs. These details anchor the space, much like the ale itself, solid, sustaining, and just intoxicating enough to soften the world's edges. You notice a man offering his seat to a woman carrying a jug, then sliding onto the bench beside her instead of returning to his friends. The exchange is brief, a few words lost in the noise, but they rise together soon after and step into the cool night. Whether planned or sparked by chance, only they will know. By the time the fire burns low and conversation slows, the alehouse has done its work. Bodies are warmed. Words have loosened. A few threads between people have been stitched, others quietly eased apart. When you step back into the lane, the night feels quieter than it is. The muffled laughter inside clings to you like smoke in your hair. You walk home more slowly than you arrived, carrying the taste of malt on your tongue and the low hum of a place where nothing is ever only about the ale. The smell of fresh bread reaches you before the bakehouse comes into view. It's an early morning scent, yeast, wood smoke, and the deep, nutty sweetness of grain becoming something more than itself. The loaf tucked under your arm radiates warmth, its scent mingling with the early morning air as you step from the bakehouse. Crust and heart, yeast and intention, every step carries the invisible weight of hands and care. In the village imagination, bread and courtship have long traveled together. One loaf can be a simple thank you, another a quiet declaration. Timing, context, and a blush can turn an ordinary gift into a signal, a gesture noticed at the well or whispered under hedges. Ledger notes from the 14th and 15th centuries hint at these courtesy loaves, often penned in the margins alongside wedding accounts months later. Sweetened with cinnamon or nutmeg, if the household could afford it, the bread carried a double meaning, rare enough to be memorable, fleeting enough to demand a swift reply. Inside the bakehouse, the air dusted with flour like the first snow, the oven's roar paints the baker's faces gold. Hands brush while baskets pass. A question about the weather becomes a story about last year's harvest. In the warmth, literal and otherwise, these exchanges feel private, even amid the clatter of paddles and shuffle of feet. One Devon account tells of a baker's apprentice shaping a loaf roughly into a heart, hiding it among round loaves for a weekly customer. Whether she noticed immediately is unknown, but a year later they married, proof, in the village imagination, of bread's magic. Not all bread courtship is sweet. Some loaves are tests, playful or pointed. A folkloric tale warns of a woman rejecting a suitor who offered bread so hard it cracked a bench. Scholars note that such gestures revealed skill, patience, and wit, part of the larger dance of rural courtship. Bread carried a spiritual undertone too. In Christian symbolism, it was life itself, a God-given gift, and offering it could invoke blessing. Giving someone bread from your own oven was a quiet promise. You wanted them at your table, in your home, as part of your life. You imagined slipping a warm loaf into someone's hands, the heat transferring, the faint crunch of crust audible between them. Perhaps you've scored it with a simple cross or an intricate pattern only they would notice. They thank you, and the moment is gone, but the scent lingers, filling kitchens and thoughts alike. Outside, the village edges melt into hedges and crooked oaks, gnarled like old men leaning in for gossip. Beyond them lies the stretch everyone half whispers about, the forbidden woods. Not vast, not truly wild, but cloaked in shadow and story. Perfect for meetings meant to escape prying eyes. By daylight, the woods seem welcoming. Birdsong drips from branches, the scent of pine and damp earth mingles with shafts of golden sunlight piercing the canopy. But at twilight, the palette shifts. Greens deepen to black, the undergrowth moves in peripheral vision, silence thickens enough to hear your pulse. Couples slipping into these trees during festivals or summer evenings understand why. The woods keep secrets better than alehouses, barns, or any doorway prone to knocks. Parish gossip often cast the woods in supporting roles. She was seen returning with her hair loose, a detail suggesting anything from an innocent stroll to scandal. Court testimonies from the 14th century reveal that promises made under a green bough in these woods could carry social weight akin to public vows if overheard by the right ears. Folklore imbued the woods with caution and invitation. Certain glades were blessed, where lovers' promises held fast. Others were dangerous. Step into the wrong ring of mushrooms and you might be cursed in love for a year. These tales served both to dare and to deter. Bold hearts or curious minds tested which were true. One Welsh account tells of a shy young man leaving a posy of wildflowers in an oak hollow for a girl he could not address publicly. She responded with a ribbon tied to the same branch. Over the summer, their courtship unfolded in silent offerings until, finally, they met under that oak, with only the breeze as witness. Forbidden did not always mean legally off-limits. Often, the woods were part of the lord's estate, and trespassing technically counted as poaching. The thrill of risk added spice to the rendezvous. If caught, you claimed to be gathering firewood or mushrooms, even if your hands were suspiciously empty. You step beneath the canopy. Village noise dissolves. Leaves murmur above, a quiet council of trees. The air is cooler, heavier, tinged with moss and a sweetness you cannot name. Every footfall, every inhalation pulls you deeper into the wood's embrace, where light, shadow, and scent conspire to hold secrets better than any eye could. Your boots press into the dusty path beneath the village gate, each step muted against the packed earth. The timbered arch above, bleached to silver by sun and season, bears the scars of years, iron straps streaked with rust like veins, knots and splits that seem to remember every cartwheel and clumsy horse hoof. From the shadow of the arch, the road stretches into darkness, bordered by hedgerows and the lumped silhouettes of trees. The quiet is different here, taut, expectant, as though the air itself waits for the shuffle of a shoe, the faint scrape of a wheel, or a whispered word carried just far enough to remain private. By day, the gate is all business. Watchmen mind the curfew, keep an eye on travelers, enforce the rules. By night it transforms. From their posts, a subtle choreography unfolds. Footsteps halt just short of the torchlight. A basket passes silently between hands. Words are exchanged in hushed tones, measured against the possibility of an ear too close. Town records and depositions from the 14th and 15th centuries occasionally note these meetings, sometimes marked as harmless, sometimes scandalous. In a village where everyone knows whose boots are whose, plausible deniability is an art. You might claim to be delivering a message, checking the road, returning from a late errand, and yet, everyone understands the real intent. The torchlight flickers, casting long, soft shadows across the arch. You pause just beyond the circle of illumination, allowing the gate's weight to anchor you. A figure appears from the darkness, perhaps the person you've been waiting for, perhaps a companion in need of discretion. The exchange is delicate. A small parcel, a whispered message, a glance heavy with meaning. No one else is needed, the gate itself witnesses, stoic and unjudging. Even the night air seems in on the secret, carrying the faint scent of pine from the hedgerows, the tang of smoke from distant hearths, and the subtle warmth of shared intent. Every footfall, every rustle of cloth, carries significance. Light jokes, mock complaints about the chill, a comment on how the wind conspires to tangle hair, or a quiet groan at a bent sleeve, slip between them, grounding the meeting in human intimacy. The gate, in all its weathered solidity, becomes a stage for clandestine connection, part theater, part ritual, part careful negotiation. Eventually, the moment passes. The parcel is delivered, words exchanged, and footsteps fade back into the night. The torchlight dims, leaving the gate to its own quiet. It will hold the memory of what passed here, every pause, every glance, every stolen laugh, until the next shadow stretches beneath its arch. The village sleeps, unaware that just beyond the boundary of lawful sight, the night itself has been bent to human desire, discretion, and subtle courtship. You step back into the lane, the night wrapping around you like a cloak. The torches sputter in their brackets, casting dancing shadows on the walls of cottages and fences. The air smells faintly of hay and warm earth, a subtle reminder that the world continues to live and breathe beyond the quiet of the herb-filled room. Somewhere near the gate, a watchman leans against his spear, head tipped toward the sky, exchanging half-hearted jokes with his partner. Their murmurs are a background hum, an acknowledgement of the night's rhythm without intruding on it. From the deeper shadows by the gate post, someone waits. Perhaps already speaking to the watch in tones low enough that only you can catch them. Every detail is heightened, the creak of hinges as the wind nudges the gate, the crunch of gravel under a shifting foot, the glint of a silver clasp catching the torchlight, the subtle curve of a cheek emerging from darkness. Here, in this liminal space, caution and thrill interweave. Anyone could appear at any moment, yet the publicness keeps actions measured, words clipped. The value is in the fleeting seconds, the glance exchanged, the scrap of parchment slipped from hand to hand, the joke whispered in mock innocence. Light joke number 1. a whispered claim that you're merely checking the gate hinges for rust. Number 2, an exaggerated salute to the watch, as if you were a visiting lord inspecting the walls. Number 3, a dry remark that you've arrived just in time for the changing of the guard. Even if the watch is only half asleep, the meeting is a dance performed in miniature. 2 or 3 minutes pass, carrying weight far beyond their length, and then you step away, letting the shadows reclaim the space. The torch flickers once in the breeze. The gate stands as before, unchanged in form, yet holding the memory of your moment like stone holding sunlight. Back inside, the low table near the hearth holds bundles of herbs, rosemary, mugwort, marjoram, some tied neatly with twine, others lying loose as if freshly plucked. The old woman at the table works with patient skill, knotting and twisting stems into patterns that carry meaning only she fully understands. She is more than a midwife or herbalist, she is the keeper of charms, quiet guardians against wandering hearts and unseen rivalries. The packets are slipped into hems, mattress seams, or hung behind doors, working in secret. Some are playful tokens of care, others serious safeguards, and all are threaded with intention. Inventories from 14th and 15th century households record these charms alongside practical goods, sometimes surfacing in disputes over broken promises or jealousy. Folklore adds its own color. In Brittany, a ribbon tied in 3 knots might hold a man's gaze. In the Low Countries, a small herb biscuit could travel in a satchel, reminding its bearer of home. In Ireland, a carved heart buried in a rival's garden could bend fortune, or mischief, through the roots. Ecclesiastical records occasionally frown upon such practices, but the habits persist quietly, a testament to human desire and ingenuity. You watch as one charm is made, the table lit by a single candle, shadows dancing across the bundles of herbs. Fingers select the right sprigs, basil for faithfulness, thyme for courage, winding them together with red thread, chosen for its reputation as a protective color. The knot is tied deliberately, ends trimmed, packet small enough to hide in a fold of cloth. Light joke number 1. The maker mutters that if this charm fails, nothing short of a bigger dowry might succeed. Number 2. A friend asks if a charm can stop their goat from wandering, earning an arch look. Number 3. Someone suggests doubling up charms in one bed, a redundancy the maker deems unnecessary but amusing. Whether these charms serve as reminders, signals, or unseen protections, they are also gestures of care, investment, and belief in a fragile human bond. In a village where everyone observes your comings and goings and temptation rides the market carts as easily as gossip, a simple bundle of herbs is both reassurance and safeguard. You leave, the scent of rosemary clinging to your hands, and imagine that somewhere in your own bedding, a knot rests quietly, doing its work while the night breathes around you. The fire in the hearth crackles softly, casting a glow that dances across the walls and ceiling. You shift slightly under the heavy woolen blanket, feeling the warmth seep into chilled muscles. The person beside you stirs, and a quiet laugh escapes, half amusement, half acknowledgement of the subtle battle for blanket real estate. The shared space is intimate without needing words, a choreography developed over hours of winter nights, the kind that makes ordinary proximity feel like a pact. Outside, the wind rattles the thatch and schemes across the frozen lane, but inside, the air is heavy with warmth, human and hearth alike. You can feel the rise and fall of breath, hear the soft scrape of wool against wool, and sense the careful negotiation of space and comfort. Light joke number 1. A whispered complaint that elbows are wielded as winter weapons. Number 2. A mock observation that cold toes serve as the only reliable alarm clock in January. Number 3. A playful declaration that the bed is not shared for warmth at all, but as a strategic alliance against ghosts, which, you argue, are especially active in deep winter. Memories of the village square, the stolen kiss by the well, linger faintly, mingling with the scent of smoke and pine from the hearth. Here, under blankets and quiet, those public signals of affection are mirrored in private. The winter cuddle pack, practical and protective, carries a subtle rhythm of trust. A hand brushing lightly, a shoulder nudging closer, warmth exchanged in silence. Sometimes, these cold season arrangements ended with nothing more than shared comfort. Other times, they evolved into spring courtships, formal promises, even marriages. The line between convenience and desire is thin, and in the hush of a winter night, it often disappears entirely. You exhale, letting the warmth and closeness settle into your bones, aware that, outside, the village sleeps, oblivious to the small alliances being formed beneath the quilts. And as the hours pass, the night folds around you both like a living thing, soft, dark, and patient, holding the quiet pact you share until the first pale hint of dawn presses against the thatch. The ritual of handfasting was as much about the everyday as it was about ceremony. You can imagine it. Two people sitting on the edge of the bed, hands tied lightly with a strip of cloth, the ribbon looped with care so that it could be undone without harm. A small carved spoon rests between them, a symbol of shared labor at the table to come. Beside it, a miniature loaf, fresh from the oven or perhaps a sweetened bun with a pinch of cinnamon, carries both sustenance and intention. The exchange is quiet, deliberate. Even the simplest gestures, like brushing a stray lock of hair from the other's face or adjusting the blanket so warmth spreads evenly, take on layered significance. The trial year begins not with grand declarations but with the rhythm of daily life. Lighting the hearth, drawing water from the well, tending the animals, preparing meals, these become tests of compatibility as much as courtship. Scholars note that the mundane acts of living together carried more weight than any feast or festival, revealing character, patience, and willingness to compromise. In some villages, the couple might whisper light jokes over these chores. Number 1. A quip about who is better at chopping wood without chopping fingers. Number 2. Playful debate over whether the cat is now theirs or merely tolerated. Number 3. Mock dispute over who must fetch water for the morning wash, each feigning outrage at the unfairness. The year-long pact also held room for intimacy. A shared bowl of broth at the fire could evolve into leaning close to warm, chilled fingers. A handfasting could stretch into the woods for a stolen moment under branches that had seen many pacts before, or into the quiet of the alehouse when others were distracted with their own business. Touch, glance, and laughter layered over these daily routines carried a significance both social and personal. When the year and a day were complete, the couple faced choice. To untie the ribbon and go their separate ways, with memories tucked carefully away, or to carry the knot to the church, formalizing the union in the eyes of God and village alike. Handfasting allowed for love to test itself in ordinary life, without the pressure of permanent commitment too early. And whether it ended quietly or led to marriage, the act left a mark, in memory, in habit, in small tokens left behind on shelves or in chests, the physical reminders of a season shared. Even centuries later, accounts linger in parish notes and household inventories, a strip of cloth carefully preserved, a carved spoon passed down, a loaf wrapped in linen. They speak quietly of the human impulse to bind connection in tangible ways, to let affection grow alongside daily labor, and to negotiate both heart and household before making a promise that would endure. The village at dusk hums with life, yet it is in the small gestures that the subtlest messages travel. A ribbon tucked just so, a cap angled with care, a scarf adjusted more than strictly necessary, these are the language of attention and intention, whispered to those who know how to read it. You watch as the market clears and shadows stretch long across the cobbles, each step stirring dust and carrying signals you half recognize, half imagine. The red lining of your cloak, just glimpsed as you move among the departing crowd, is your reply. Quiet, deliberate, a small punctuation to the unspoken conversation already underway. You do not need to speak. The village itself becomes a witness, a chorus interpreting the gestures of its residents. Just as the weather tells of rain or shine, so the tilt of a hat or the tug of a sleeve can mark a shift in hearts. Light joke number 1. You muse that if everyone interpreted every scarf adjustment as intent, the town would need a dedicated clerk to record the romantic weather each day. Number 2. You imagine a villager walking by with 2 left boots and a crooked hat, thinking everyone is desperately signaling affection. Number 3. The idea that the postman would need to be trained in decoding cloak colors just to deliver letters without causing a scandal. Even as the marketplace empties, the signals remain, poised to be read again in the hearthlit homes, along the winding lanes, and in the fields where work continues into dusk. The gold hour softens the edges of the village, smoothing the bustling noise into a tapestry where meaning flows in gestures, glances, and tiny adjustments. Each step you take home is part of the rhythm, a rhythm of subtle exchanges that bind the village together in patterns older than the stones beneath your feet. And so you walk, aware that every flick of cloth, every shadowed look, every whispered adjustment may be a message, or maybe nothing at all. But the attentive eye knows that in these small acts, the heart speaks loudest, and the days ahead will hold the answers that only patience, observation, and quiet courage can reveal. The hall hums with warmth and movement. Shadows stretch across the rough-hewn beams, shifting as the fire flickers, and the scent of peat smoke mingles with the tang of cider and the faint sweetness of drying herbs. Musicians play in quiet corners, fingers coaxing notes from lute and drum, while villagers lean close, nodding to the rhythm, exchanging sideways glances that carry meaning beyond the melody. The songs are alive in their duality. On the surface, they are work songs, harvest songs, familiar refrains. Underneath, the lyrics thread through desire, courtship, and playful mockery. A line about carrying apples might literally speak of baskets, but the subtext, understood by those who listen with care, turns the orchard into a garden of flirtation. The audience treads the delicate line between amusement and propriety, the laughter controlled yet tinged with excitement. Light joke number 1. An old farmer muttering that he's never seen a lumac used in quite that way before, eyebrows twitching with half disbelief and half pleasure. Number 2. A woman claiming she must now inspect every apple in her basket before selling, lest secret meanings slip past her. Number 3. A young man asking if there's a verse about mending boots, suddenly very interested in cobbling for entirely unrelated reasons. Ethnomusicologists note that these songs were more than entertainment. They offered a coded language for communities in which direct talk of desire or courtship was socially risky. A wink, a pause, a playful inflection could transform mundane words into messages meant only for certain ears. Others argue the songs were simply a social lubricant, a way to inject levity and release in long, harsh winters. Likely, they were both, a careful balancing act of expression and discretion, crafted to amuse, signal, and safeguard reputations all at once. You watch the circle around the hearth, noting how glances and gestures punctuate the music. Each laugh, each shake of the head, each feigned gasp adds texture to the performance. In this way, the songs themselves become a stage for subtle courtship, playful teasing, and the intricate dance of social interaction. In a village bound by labor, custom, and observation, the music carries stories that extend far beyond the notes, keeping secrets, marking intentions, and letting hearts speak softly where words might betray them. The crowd around the corner is a mix of stifled laughter and exasperated sighs. The young man fidgets, the small pouch swinging from his fingers, while the older woman scrutinizes him with the patience of someone who has seen charms misfire more times than she can count. The air smells faintly of rain-soaked cobbles, herbs, and the lingering smoke from the hearths. A stray cat whines between boots, brushing past legs as if to inspect the scene. In these villages, magic and mischief often walked hand in hand. Love charms were practical, playful, or desperate, sometimes all three at once. The charm might be meant to pull a lover closer, keep a spouse faithful, or simply smooth a rocky courtship. Yet the law, superstition, and community standards constantly kept them in check. A miscast knot could make the wrong person blush, or worse, provoke a sermon from the parish priest. And the village always noticed. Light joke number 1. Someone whispers that the charm seems to have made the stew too affectionate, suggesting the entire hall will be courting one another by morning. Number 2. Another adds that next time, perhaps the young man should read the instructions before sprinkling magic like salt. Number 3. A bystander mutters that at least he didn't try the same trick on the mayor. We'd have had a procession of unintended lovers by sundown. Scholars note that these incidents reveal more than humor. They show how medieval communities balanced belief, social oversight, and entertainment. The charm's failure becomes a story woven into the village memory, a cautionary tale with a grin attached. The young man finally bows his head, accepts the gentle scolding, and retrieves the rogue pouch. The crowd disperses slowly, conversation shifting back to mundane concerns. The weather, the next market day, who brought what produce. But the misfired charm lingers, a whispered joke, a lesson in care, and a reminder that even in earnest acts of affection, life has a way of adding its own twist. As you walk past, the corners of your mind hum with the textures of the night, the slick cobbles, the scent of herbs, the soft murmur of conversation, and the faint echo of the laughter. The village, with all its missteps, charms, and coded glances, feels alive in a way the daylight never fully captures. Or worse. That dynamic made failure less final than it might seem. In a way, the charm succeeded if it got people speaking the couple's names in the same sentence. By the end of the exchange, the older woman has decided to return the pouch, though not without a warning to use it on yourself if you must. The young man pockets it with a shrug and a smile that suggests the morning will find him at the herb seller's stall again, asking for something stronger. As the crowd disperses, the lane smells briefly of rosemary and rain. A reminder that in the medieval village, love, like the weather, could change with a single small misstep. The last night before a wedding is a strange one. The day has been spent in Iran's borrowing extra benches, fetching casks of ale from the brewer, making sure the borrowed cloak for the groom actually fits across his shoulders. Now the village has settled into a hush, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of a cartwheel on its way home. In the bride's cottage, the air is warm with firelight and the smell of beeswax candles, but under the hum of preparations runs a quieter current. The knowledge that tomorrow will change more than anyone says aloud. In some places this night was marked by a formal custom. In others it passed like any other evening, save for the restless thoughts it carried. Accounts from the 14th and 15th centuries speak of keeping vigil in the bride's home, family and friends staying late, telling stories, offering advice that mixed sincerity with playful warnings. A sister might whisper about what it's like to share a bed through winter. An aunt might advise on stretching a stew to feed unexpected guests. A friend might smuggle in a sprig of rosemary to tuck under the pillow for luck in the first year. Folklore dressed the night in superstition. In parts of rural Germany, the bride was not to step outside after sunset, lest wandering spirits confuse her path to marriage. In an English village custom, she was to wear a borrowed garment to bed, ensuring she would dream the face of her future contentment, as if she didn't already know it well. And in some Breton fishing communities, the groom was forbidden to sleep under his own roof, staying instead with a friend, so that the first morning he and his bride woke together would be their wedding day. You imagine the sensory fabric of it, the fire's steady crackle, the soft drag of a comb through hair, the faint resin scent from the candle as it pulls into golden wax. The bride's hands are busy, not because there's work left to do, but because the stillness makes the heart race. She mends a hem already mended, polishes a clasp until it gleams, then sets it aside, only to pick it up again. Her mother hums a lullaby that hasn't been sung in years, as if to smooth the air into calm. Light joke number 1 might come from her brother, leaning in the doorway to remind her she can still run if she starts now. Number 2, from a cousin who offers to hide her under the hay in the loft until the fuss dies down. Number 3, from the bride herself, rolling her eyes and promising she'll be fine so long as no one makes her dance with Uncle Bernard before the feast has started. Historians of social life note that this night often carried a double role. It was a moment for private reflection, but also the community's last chance to confirm its support for the union. In villages where marriage bound not just two people but two families' resources and labor, the eve of the wedding was as much a checkpoint as a celebration. By morning all hesitations had to be smoothed away, at least in public. Sometimes it was also the night when personal promises were made small, quiet vows outside the church's hearing. A couple might meet briefly at a doorway, exchanging nothing more than a touch of hands, each reading in the other's eyes the road ahead. Or they might slip a token into the other's keeping, a length of ribbon, a coin, a sprig of some herb with its own silent meaning. These gestures, undocumented and unbead by official words, often held a weight remembered long after the ceremony itself. When the candles burn low, the household settles. Outside the lane is silvered with moonlight, and the frost beginning to form on the thatch glitters like scattered salt. Tomorrow will bring bells, feasting, music, and the clamor of voices raised in toasts. But tonight belongs to the in-between. No longer entirely single, not yet entirely bound. The bride lies down beneath the heavy quilt, the borrowed garment warm from her skin, the rosemary tucked under her pillow. She closes her eyes, the murmur of the fire fading into the slow rhythm of her breath, and lets the last night of this chapter slip quietly into sleep.